Hi, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We got a lot of people signed up for this Beyond the Bylines event tonight, so it may take people a few minutes to roll in. As you're coming in, maybe this is what it says in the chat already. Yeah, we would love to hear a little bit in the chat about where you're dialing in from, your connection to the Forward, your connection to Israel, if you have one. And just introduce yourself in the chat. If you can't, I may have screwed this up. Maybe you can't chat to everyone. Anyway, that's okay. If you can't chat to everyone, we'll just imagine where you're all from and your connections to Israel. That was my bad. I'm Jodi, by the way. That's my mistake. Anyway, as it says in the chat, people are chatting just to us, which is totally cool. We got Palm Springs in Minnesota and DC to start us off. So go ahead and chat to us. We'll enjoy hearing where you're from. People are continuing to roll in. We have a great crowd coming in. And as the Forward announced in the chat, which I hope you saw, we will be taking your questions after I start us off with some questions. So use the Q&A button. It's going to be on the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop, and on the side if you're on a phone or a tablet. But you can use that to pose a question. Don't put your questions in the chat. We won't see them. All right, and while people are coming in, I'm going to just read a little bit about, we've got people, seriously, a great national and probably international turnout from Durham, from Seattle, from San Francisco, San Clemente, and Torrance. And then we have someone who's Israeli born from a kibbutz near Gaza, now living in Maryland. Got someone in New Haven whose brother and two nephews have made Aliyah. And Sarasota, Florida. Reston, Virginia, with ancestors from Ukraine. Cambridge, Massachusetts. I haven't seen one person from the New York, Merrick, New York. Chicago, Brattleboro, Vermont, Fort Collins, Colorado, Cardiff by this is an amazing list. I am so excited of everybody.
Wow, I see Utah. This is Rachel. I'm the publisher.
So such a range of places. Tucson, Arizona. We got Yiddish speakers. We've got people who visit Israel every year. Now people are chatting to everyone. Thanks for the direction, Laura. So now everyone can see this and I'll stop reading it. And we might be ready to start. Rachel, do you think we're ready to start?
Yeah, 7:04. I think we can officially begin. I'm going to turn my video on. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see me. I'm Rachel Fishman-Feddersen. I am the CEO and publisher of The Forward. I'm coming to you from New Jersey tonight in my Forward jacket. I'm so excited for this event, which is a very special one. We still have some people filtering in, but they'll just miss my intro. This is our first Behind the Bylines event of the year. This one is about reporting from Israel after October 7th, and you're going to hear from several of our journalists who reported from Israel since October. The reason this is really a special event is this is our member exclusive event, our member exclusive event series, Behind the Bylines, that we're hosting especially to thank you, our supporters, and to give you a firsthand look at what goes on behind the scenes in our newsroom, because clearly you're interested in that and we want to share that with you. This is a marker. We want to show you how much we appreciate your support, especially at this time. The 4 months since October 7th have been a truly unprecedented time for American Jews and for reporting on our world at The Forward. So we've had reporters in Israel almost continuously since the first week of the war. And tonight we've gathered those journalists, our editor-in-chief, Jodi Rudoren, our former opinion editor, Laura E. Adkins, our senior political reporter, Jacob Kornbluh, and our current Israel correspondent, Susan Greene, sometimes called Susie. Susie is joining us from Israel, where I believe it is 2 o'clock in the morning right now. So she took a little disco nap and is joining us for this exciting event. Their reporting I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud to run the organization that brings you this reporting. It has provided clarity amid chaos. Our reporters have spoken to officials, to citizens, to soldiers. They visited the devastated kibbutzim, Tel Aviv's Hostage Square, the Knesset, And through it all, they're bringing us reporting that is driven by truth and not ideology. So our moderators have shared a document at the bottom of the Zoom window that you can download with some of their stories and photos. So I'm very excited for tonight. I just want to tell you a tiny bit more, and then I'm going to turn it over to the reporters. So being a Forward supporter, you probably know that in December, we removed our paywall for all of our coverage, which means that for the first time in our 126-year history, Forward journalism is now free and available to everyone, everywhere. And we took this step because we believe that during this chaotic moment of war, disinformation, and rising anti-Semitism, open access to our independent Jewish journalism is essential to our community's health, essential to democracy. We believe in journalism. We believe in Jewish journalism. But bringing you the journalism and reporting on a war takes a lot of resources. So we're really happy to be able to thank you with this event. We are very grateful for your support. Your gift has an immediate impact on our ability to continue this work. If you can make an additional donation, I would never say no. I'd be extremely grateful. And if you can think of at least one person that you can share the forward with after this event, that would be extremely helpful for us. We are here to serve the whole community. We are looking to spread the word about our great journalism and to really get a place of clarity amid chaos out there for our Jewish community and beyond. And that's it for my spiel. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jodi Rudoren, our editor-in-chief, who will kick off our discussion with our other Forward colleagues. Over to you, Jodi.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I, just want to say, you're going to hear in a few minutes from Laura E. Adkins, who was our first reporter, first journalist to go on the ground there. And when October 7th, the events were unfolding and Laura raised her hand, and I told Rachel that we were sending Laura and what it was going to cost to get her there, to house her there, to get her a vest and helmet so that she could go down to the kibbutzim, to get her insurance. There was never, we didn't have money in the budget for this, obviously. And Rachel and I just said, yes, of course, we need to go cover this. And then we figured it out. And the way we figured it out was by telling you all, our supporters, what we needed, and you responded. So thank you for that. And because of that, we were able to send Laura, who can turn on her video now, and then send Jacob, who can turn on his video now, and then send me, and then hire Susie, who arrived a couple of weeks ago and who's going to be there for at least 6 months. And you can turn on your video now, Susan, if you haven't fallen asleep. Oh, there she is. It's 2 a.m. Thank you for joining us. I want to just jump right in and start off. As some of you know, I mean, I'll say a little bit more about each of us and our backgrounds as we go, rather than do like a list of introductions. I think many of you know that I came to the Forward after working at the New York Times for many years, including 4 years as Jerusalem bureau chief, which included 2 wars in Gaza in 2012 and 2014. So this storyline, unfortunately, fortunately, I don't even know how to think about it, but is a storyline with which, I'm deeply, intimately familiar. And so it has really been both an honor and a responsibility to find myself in this chair at this time and to be leading this coverage and participating in it. Susie Greene, who came to us, literally started her first day at the Forward was less than a month ago. She's been on the ground in Israel for, I think, 16 days. 15 of them have been raining. Susan came to us after a long and distinguished career at the Denver Post, where she was a Pulitzer winner and a Pulitzer finalist. She then went and started on her own 2 nonprofit newsrooms to really address the local news crisis in our country. And I was overjoyed when she first wrote and reached out about this position. And I do want to start by asking you, Susie, what on earth made you in middle age, you're about my age, so I can say that, you're living in Colorado, your kids are in college, you have maybe living your best life. What on earth made you say, I want to uproot myself and, move to Israel for 6 months to cover this really challenging, really horrific story? That's the first question. And the second part of the question is, what has surprised you most besides the rain in your not quite 3 weeks there so far?
Yeah, 2 weeks. Well, what motivated me to apply and sort of uproot myself was that this is the biggest story there is, and the most interesting story. I was spending all of my time reading all about it. I had a ton of questions that weren't being answered. And it just seemed kind of dreamy. And so I wrote you and you wrote right back, and I'm so glad that that happened. What has surprised me is I think I had forgotten how open Israelis are, like how fun they are to interview, and just candid and funny and honest and harsh and all of those things that I've been living in Colorado for 26 years covering news there. Like, people don't necessarily answer your questions in such a great, direct way. And so that has been lovely. I think, obviously experiencing my first rocket sirens and all of that, that happens intellectually, but when you're here and you're like at a bus stop and you don't actually know what to do, and then you hear the big explosion and you look at everyone's, faces, that is something you can't know from abroad. I think also just the level of frustration and anger that people have, that they don't feel safe, that their government did not keep them safe on October 7th. And the increasing, every day, it just feels like it gets worse. Frustration about the hostage situation is just palpable. And I feel like people's heads are popping off about it.
Laura and Jacob, bear with me for a minute. I'm going to ask Susie another question because I'm going to also release her if she wants to sign off afterwards, since it is really, really late/early there. But I'm struck by what you said about seeing people's faces and about I want to ask you about the mood. And I know just this afternoon or this evening, you went over to Hostage Square. You decided to go because we saw these headlines about that more hostages than we had originally thought are believed to be dead by the IDF, 32 of the 136 remaining. And we thought we should go see what the mood is there. And you've been to Hostage Square a number of times. You were there watching some yoga, I think on your first or second day. You've interviewed a lot of people there. I just love to hear tell us about the mood that you're saying. Tell us about the things you can only see in their faces.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, just that thing that, when people are clenching their jaw and it's kind of going, burp, 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 you can see that. I think I maybe expected more sadness and less anger. And even from 2 weeks ago till today I saw much more anger. So you can see that. You can see, I think people are just so torn between trying to be kind of, a good Israeli and patriotic and supportive of their country at a time of war, and really kind of holding their tongues and honestly a little scared sometimes to say how they feel, but they kind of can't help themselves. And I think that this is what always sort of strikes me in this job, is how glad they are that someone asked. I think that, there are all kinds of journalists who feel like we're going out there and like stealing people's souls and things like that by trying to interview them. And I just think they're happy to be asked how they're feeling. And especially by someone who's not from this country. And I think that, you know, with all the tension and the anger, there's something cathartic to be able to explain that to somebody and know that it's going to get out there. So that's what I'm feeling.
Yeah,
And I
that's,
just, these conversations like could go on forever. They could just talk forever.
I have always said, I agree with you. I've always said that one of the sort of dirty little secrets about our business is that most people don't have enough people in their lives to actually really listen to them, actively engage and listen. We're also busy. And that when you show up with a pen and a paper and just really listen, people are really grateful. People have a lot to
Yeah.
say. Laura, I want to go back to that Black Shabbat, as it's been dubbed now. And I remember we were talking in the very early afternoon, I think, and you're like, I want to go. I'll get on the plane tonight. We didn't end up getting on a plane that night. It took a little more doing.
Yeah.
But tell me about that instinct, that moment, and then also how it maybe was or wasn't what you expected when you got there.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect, but I do know that the reason that I became a journalist is that I wanted to be where things were happening. And I think sort of like first responders, journalists have a tendency to run toward where things are happening. And I also just felt a responsibility as a Jew to be there and to be using my skill set of talking about what's happening to figure out what was happening. I think when we were on the phone, I said, I was like, Jodi, it's like the biggest thing to happen to our world since ever, perhaps. And I had hosted a Shabbat dinner the night before, actually, with a ton of friends. So I didn't see the news until 7 or 8 o'clock the next morning. And even then, I just remember it was, I think, maybe 20 people had been identified as casualties. There was still so much confusion. And even then, I was just glued to Israeli television, and it seemed like something was happening. And yeah, I just knew that we needed to have someone there. And I knew that, I started my journalism career in Israel. I have a lot of connections there. So it just seemed like, for me, I don't have kids or a partner that would be worrying. So it seemed like a no-brainer for me.
Jacob, you went in November. I think you also would have gotten on the plane that first night, right? Jay, you are a political reporter. You went and you did some political stories and some not political stories. Why don't you, maybe you should talk a little about what surprised you. I think both Laura and Jacob, we should say, you both are pretty fluent in Hebrew. You both consume news and follow social media of Israelis all the time, not just when there's a war, right? You live a little bit in both worlds. Jacob, you have 2 kids who are studying in Israel right now, right? So, and you probably, both of you have gone to Israel numerous times. But tell me about how, when you got there this time, which was, I think, maybe 5 or 6 weeks into the war, people like, what immediately struck you as different from the Israel that things that maybe aren't on the story itself, but maybe a little off the story?
So first of all, when I was in yeshiva back in 2001, the Intifada broke out then. So I was literally 500 meters away from a car exploding in flames on a Saturday night. Another day, I woke up in the morning and heard a few blocks away another car bomb. So I'm really used to observing, first of all, what Israelis are going through from afar, but also actually being there and knowing what they feel when they're under this intense security situation. But I think what was very different this time is 2 things. First, you for the first time, and you mentioned that I travel to Israel quite a bit. I'm there probably twice a year at least. And always when you go either to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem, or to other major cities, you just see so much going on, so much action, people sitting outside of the coffee shops and crossing the streets. And this time you come on a weekend to Jerusalem in the Shuk. Most of the shops there are closed. And I asked, is it because it's a short Friday? And people there told me, no, we just don't have either the shop owners are in reserve, fighting in Gaza, or they just close shop because there's no business, there's no tourism. So that was one thing that actually surprised me, that how quiet it was. But also on the other hand, while the war is raging in Gaza, you actually don't necessarily feel the impact of the war within Israel. There's no major rocket fires, especially reduced in the last few weeks. But even then, it was once a day or twice a week, sirens in Tel Aviv. But what you saw actually from speaking to people was that people are equally angry at the government that failed them, but also at this conception that we might seek peace with the Palestinians and everything will be okay with us. Most of the people who lived in the Gaza envelope are actually peaceniks, as they call themselves. They support a two-state solution. They were the ones demonstrating against the government and probably voting for the leftist of all the parties running in the general elections. And they are hurt, and they are saying, we should not return until Hamas is defeated. We should not accept the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is not just the right wing saying it. This is not just Netanyahu. These are the people who say we might support peace in one day, but right now security is our first priority.
Yeah, it's, if I can add to what Jacob's saying, it's hard to convey if you're not following the Hebrew press just how united in those first days, weeks, months, all the left, right, there is no left, right now in terms of domestic Israeli policy. Yes, we'll probably get into some of the conversations and differences about prioritizing hostages versus different objectives of the war, but I have a good friend, Amir Tibon, who you may have seen with his father, General Noam, on all of the news stations recently. I saw him like a week before we were having a beer in New York. He was like, oh, come to my kibbutz, it's amazing. And just, it's hard. I think Susie put it really well when she said she expected more sadness and less anger. I was there running all around the country, and everyone, it was either, if you've ever been in a car crash, there's that after the impact, you can't hear, like your ears are ringing and the airbag smoke is all around. Like it very much, people were in that state emotionally. And if they weren't in that state, they were pissed. Most of you have probably read our colleague Rob Eshman's pieces, including about his brother-in-law, David Levy, who runs a big section of the kibbutz movement. And I visited him when I was there, and they were just scrambling. Most of their laborers were either killed or kidnapped or couldn't get in the country. And so it was like just this confusion. And I think once Jacob got there, it settled into a little bit more of the rhythm. But I will say, even within the first Shabbat after Shabbat Shachor, Black Shabbat, after Shabbat in Jerusalem on the main streets, people were at restaurants, the bars were full, the stores that had capacity did have people. So there was already an energy happening.
So I just shared Rob's story about his brother-in-law, and I just asked him last week to catch up with his brother-in-law. So we will hopefully be hearing more about what David Levy's thinking about 4 months in very, very soon. I want to ask everybody if Susan's still with us, and if not, we'll just start with the three of us. I mean, I think it's always been true that there's that Israeli Jews and American Jews don't fully understand each other. There's Israeli Jews who's come here are always like surprised to learn X and Y about American Jews. American Jews who go there, especially if they actually interact with Israelis and don't just go on tours, are always surprised about X or Y. And I think that this is continues to be true and is true in a new and important way in the war. So I would love to hear everybody's perspective about what you, Susan, are learning, Laura and Jacob did learn or are continuing to learn about where Israeli Jews are that you think American Jews just don't get, do not understand.
Yeah, I think they really don't care what we think. And I really, when I say we, I mostly mean our nation in general, but
Meaning
know,
like the
I think,
Biden administration or meaning like
yeah,
America? Yeah.
I mean, there, it's sort of a badge of honor here. I mean, as many of you know, but I'm increasingly becoming aware of, like for Netanyahu to really talk back and not be super like a lapdog of the United States that is appealing to people here on many levels. I think as Jews in America, we feel so connected to Israel, and I think that the Israelis don't necessarily know that, or because this is their dailiness. This is not like some sort of like other place to them. And so, and I think that they don't, for all the aid that we give them and for all of the political capital that our country is spending on Israel, I am surprised every day in some interview about how they feel like we're not supporting them enough. And, it feels a little bit like, I have two slightly like old teenagers, one's 20, one's 18, you don't understand. You just can't possibly understand. And they're right, we can't possibly understand. But I think that they really do not want to, they would like to turn the volume down on us a little bit. And I actually get that. Being here, I get why. But
Jacob,
it strikes me.
Jacob, what do you think American Jews don't get about Israelis?
I think, first of all, I echo what Susan said, that, Israeli Jews really don't care about what American Jews have to say. They're probably not even aware of where American Jews are situated. But I think that American Jews don't understand the intensity and also the challenges that Israelis are facing on a daily basis. So when we debate a supplemental bill, it's not about political jockeying. It's not about who gets the praise on a deal which is bipartisan or playing political points. This has to deal with our lives. So I think that, even those, and again, I'm not dismissing any action that is being taken place right now on behalf of American Jews. If there are those who are traveling, if there are those who are protesting the war, they have to understand that Israelis, all they want now is security. And at times they blame the government led by Netanyahu of being too lenient on the US and being too sort of protective of the policies that the US administration is demanding.
Yeah, I really think part of a big thing is, and it's like we know it in our heads, but we don't really know how to feel it because we are so not vulnerable ourselves. But I think people really do not understand either what it feels like to actually be worried about being victimized by terror, and secondly, what it actually means to have so many of your own relatives or your neighbors deployed in Gaza right now or in around Gaza. Laura, anything else to add about what people don't know about Israeli Jews or don't?
Yeah, I think if you're going to Israel as a tourist, you are usually sticking to parts of Israel that most Israelis do not experience. Most Israelis don't live in Tel Aviv. The poverty rate in Israel is about 20%. 1 in 3 children live in poverty. This trip, I was fortunate enough to have a lot more conversations with people who aren't getting the microphone so much. Families of hostages who didn't really speak English, some Bedouin communities who were in unrecognized areas. And it's kind of a aphorism that most people, just want to live and just want to get through the day, but it's really true. And we kind of assign these ideologies onto people when at the end of the day, most Israelis, like most Americans, are going to vote for the person they think is going to keep them and their families safe and relatively stable.
Laura, you mentioned a couple of the great stories that you did while you were there about the Bedouins and about the hostage families. There's one in particular I want to ask you about. So, like many journalists in those early weeks, but then also I did it as well in December, but there were these organized tours for journalists to go to the different kibbutzim that were attacked. I think Jacob also went on one. I'm sure Susan will. And you went with a group of journalists to remind me which kibbutz it was. It might have been Nachal Oz. Be'eri, right? Which of course was one of the hardest hit kibbutzim. And you wrote a story about that experience, but then you wrote a second story about a book. As you were walking through one of the destroyed houses, or one of the ransacked houses, I guess it wasn't burned down, you found a book.
I did not steal it, I just want to say.
Right, you found a book that was open it was left open, and you started imagining the person who had been in that house and when they were, what they were reading this, how did they get interrupted? So and then you did another story about the book. So I'd love you to tell us, first of all, recount for us as much as you can the experience of why did the book hit you? Why did it strike you? Why did you stop? And then why and how did you follow up, and what was that? Tell us about that story.
So if you have been to a concentration camp before, you kind of have the sense of how this tour worked. There's a very deliberate path and there's a very deliberate narrative. And
saying the tours of Be'eri was similar to, and just for what it's worth, Laura also earlier in the year went to Auschwitz with second gentleman Doug Emhoff for the forward and wrote about that as well. But anyway, back to, okay, so there's this, so they're trying to take you to see certain things in Be'eri.
Right. And the very clear narrative, which makes sense, that the Israeli government, which organizes these trips, wants to project is carnage juxtaposed with strength. So everywhere you're seeing death, you're seeing tanks and soldiers and set up in very deliberate ways. And there's a spokesperson there to give you a prepared message. And I, since I was a little kid, I'm not good at standing still or listening. And so I just started to wander around on my own a little bit. And there is, if you've read my piece that I wrote about the experience, there's an exhibit in the Berlin Jewish Museum of these metal faces, basically, that you walk over. And it's meant to be very awkward and uncomfortable. And that is the feeling I had walking into these people's homes that, they didn't give permission. They were dead or kidnapped or evacuated. So there's just this discomfort, and everything is still. When I was there, Zaka volunteers were still identifying body parts from the rubble. And you really see kind of these frozen in time, food still on the table, chairs pulled back from the seats. And it really is just a freeze frame of a secular Shabbat morning. And I'll show you the cover of this book. It caught my attention because it kind of looked like how I was feeling. And she also looked like she had a story to tell. And so Israel's a small country. It's the size of New Jersey. And I reached out to a friend who works in publishing. And I said, this is by Chagai Linek. And I said, can you get me in touch with him? This book, I quickly Googled it. It's a novel, but it's based on his experience of his brother being killed in IDF service and how it impacted his mother emotionally and their entire family. And I was like, this is such a parallel for what's happening now. And he had given an interview a few years ago in Yedidot Achronot, one of the big Israeli papers, where he said, you know, I'm tired of being a metaphor for your grief. So it's like, I've got to talk to this guy. And I think my conversation with him actually exemplified a lot of the disconnect between American Jews and Israeli Jews in this moment, because, you know, he's a lefty guy. He's living in Tel Aviv. He's an author, and he hates Bibi. And I'm expecting him to be as put off by the nationalism inherent at every step in the tour that I experienced as I was. And he was kind of like, what do you expect them to do? Like, what else is a country supposed to do? And it reminded me, there was this very popular song in Israel in October and November, that if you watched the music video, it was very uncomfortable. Maybe we can put a link. It seemed like very militaristic and all of this stuff. And if any of you remember post 9/11, the song that had the line, I'll put a boot in your ass, it's the American way. Like, that same energy is kind of parallel to what was happening. And so even this lefty guy in Tel Aviv, you know, Giuliani was mayor of New York City for a reason. Like, that same level of energy and that thirst for revenge and vengeance, I think really came through in talking to this guy. So I wrote the story upon seeing the book, and just, you know, I have some of his other books, but it is being translated into English. It is not yet, but if you do read Hebrew, it's a really powerful story about how we all process our grief and our loss.
So I put the story link in the chat, Laura, but if you'll just put the name of the author and the book in there too, that would be
Yes.
great. And meanwhile, we'll turn to Jacob. I'd love to hear, Jacob, what was your favorite, might be a weird word to use for coverage of a war, but what was the story that you did while there that you think was the most meaningful, or that has stuck with you, or that you're most proud of?
There were two stories that I wrote about, which I was sort of, you know, struck by how when I was inquiring about it, how it came about. One was, first of all, the sort of, when you spoke to the families of the hostages, right? You sort of expect these people to be in despair. You expect these people to really be angry at everything that has happened that led to the kidnapping of their loved ones. And what you heard more was, number one, sort of strength, saying we are not giving up, we are waiting them to come home. And I was actually there in the period where the ceasefire was actually implemented and hostages started to come home. So you saw sort of that optimism where we can sort of bring to some relief to our loved ones by you know, encouraging and not protesting, and not just, you know, blaming the government, or not only saying that one side is responsible here. That was one, the resilience and the optimism in actually bringing them home. The second was, and I reported about it just because it was sort of fascinating at the start of the war, where there was this talk about Haredim, who are usually exempt of joining the army, actually enlisted. And it was sort of like, they came to be enlisted and to serve in the army, and everybody was talking about it, praising them and saying this is, you know, earth-shattering moment, sort of breaking the ceiling and everything. And it sort of wind down at the end that it was a few hundred people who actually joined basic training of 3 weeks, and then went into sort of a reserve list, where if and when they will need additional, you know, people to assist, whether in Gaza or up in north, if there breaks out a war with Lebanon, that they will sort of be called upon. But you didn't see those numbers grow en masse, but also, you know, talking to those people who actually showed up, you saw more those people who would show up in other times for Chesed organizations, if it's volunteers for Ichud Hatzalah, if it's those who volunteer for Zaka, who would come to any scene of a devastation, an earthquake, or a terror attack. And those are the people who are actually now sort of motivated to actually contribute more. But there's a large part within the Haredi world, if it's those in Bnei Barak or the Hasidic sects, who, wouldn't show up regardless. And this war sort of separates them from the general Israeli public. However, there are cracks here and there. So it's sort of, they earn their praise, but it's not sort of a break moment where you're starting to see sort of Haredim being enlisted in the army, and also, politicians saying, well, now we can sit down with the Haredi parties and form a coalition with them because they'll be willing to compromise. That wouldn't necessarily be the case if and when elections are to be held.
Great. Were you going to talk about a second story? No, what about yours? Were you going to talk about a second story that was your favorite? No.
The other story, which sort of, echoes some of what Susan is currently reporting, is I was at a very interesting, Saturday night. I didn't go to the mass rally in Tel Aviv. It takes time to go with the train, and it's thousands of people. And I've already been at rallies and demonstrations like that. So I went to a small rally in Jerusalem, outside Netanyahu's house, and you sort of saw like 70-year-old people. I spoke to a cancer patient, somebody who's battling cancer, and then you see an old couple, they're probably in their high 70s, with T-shirts, Netanyahu, go home. And you're like asking them, like, now is war, people are getting killed, the whole country is united. Why are we seeing sort of you continuing those protests to see Netanyahu go home? And they said, well, this is our survival. And sort of the way they described in sort of holding the government responsible despite the war, and their devotion for even being a minority but a consistent voice against the government, just sort of, described in a very unique way how Israelis are divided while being united on sort of where the leadership has took them, and what kind of leadership has to, what kind of change in leadership has to happen after the war.
I love, Jacob, how you're just such a political reporter at your core, that like even amid all of this, you're
it's
like,
a
where's the
diverse panel,
politics?
right?
What's happening, right? It's great. What you said about the resilience in general, but particularly of the hostage families, I also was really struck by. Those of many on the Zoom, I'm sure, are close followers of the Forward and know that I written about this particular hostage because I got his card at a vigil here in Montclair, and I went and tracked down his family, and I spent the first night of Hanukkah with his 5-year-old son and wife, and it was just interesting to me. There were like no tears at all. There was, it was just this resilience, and they are, the hostage families are a real mix, a real cross section of Israelis, as I think Laura was talking about. Yes, a lot of the killed and abducted are from the Gaza envelope, the kibbutzim, that are mostly peaceniks, but there are others who were at this guy was from the Nova Music Festival, and this was right after a big fight had broken out among the hostage families between basically supporters of Netanyahu and not. And this wife was saying she was still citing, even this was, 70 or some days into the crisis, and she was still citing Bibi's campaign slogan, only Bibi can get us out of this mess. Only Bibi can save us. So there certainly is different perspectives. I also spent a lot of time with Hirsch Goldberg Poland's family, parents, and the resilience of Rachel Goldberg Poland in particular, her poise and her ability to speak about what she's going through at the UN and at the Washington rally, and just endless numbers of journalists and Zoom meetings of synagogues is pretty remarkable. I am gonna turn to the questions we have from some of you in the audience in just a minute. Please go ahead and put them in there. Susan, I really do want to give you a chance to exit if you need to. So, I think it's too early for you to talk about your favorite stories, but I want you to just share with us some of the big kind of unexplored questions that are on your agenda to be sort of looking into for the next weeks and months. What are the big things on your mind that you're trying to figure out?
Yeah, well, as you know, because we're working on it together, I am been looking for a couple days at people who are leaving or considering leaving, and all of the complexities involved in that decision, and how they talk about that decision. I am, as I texted Jodi, everyone earlier today, who actually makes the decision about the hostage deal? Like, who has to approve it? So I'm fascinated to see how that works. That is dividing this nation, more and more every day. And so I'm fascinated to see how that works. I'm really have no clue whether I'll be here or not, and if it will ever happen. But if there is a change in government, how that looks and how that works, this feels so explosive. That the political crisis predating October 7th is so still present, right? And so I am fascinated by how that all works. And I'm actually really fascinated to see, this anger that people feel about having been just abandoned essentially by their government. What that turns into as maybe the crisis changes or the war ends, or, will there be a call for elections, and how that plays out here.
That relates to, I'm going to jump in there, Susan, because one of our anonymous audience members is asking exactly what might happen next in terms of politically, in terms of Netanyahu. And I'll start a little bit, Jacob, and then hand off to you. I mean, there was actually a very interesting story in the New York Times laying out like 4 scenarios of how Netanyahu might go. How this might and how his reign might end. As most people know, he's the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history. I think the polling has been very consistent that Israelis are lined up behind, fighting this war till the end, but they also want to see Netanyahu out after that. The percentages of Israelis who want that has dropped some over the 4 months, but is still beyond a majority. When they poll and ask about, who people would vote for if there was an election right away, it is generally a center-right, imagine a center-right kind of coalition replacing Netanyahu's himself, his party, and his more far-right government that's been in power now for more than a year. There's a number of ways it could happen. He has a majority of 64 out of the 120 seats in parliament. So if 5 members of that coalition get angry about anything, they can break up the coalition and lead to new elections. The sort of most likely scenario seems to be that some group of his own party of Likud members might bolt the coalition, although they would have to agree on which of them to put forward, and that's very difficult because the 5 who might bolt all basically want to replace them himself. The second possibility is really that the far right members of the coalition would be upset about perhaps some concessions on hostages or other things and would bolt the coalition. My best guess, what I've been saying, is that this phase of the war will probably end within a month or so, and that elections will be 3 months after that, 2-3 months after that. But Jacob, what do you think? And what scenarios didn't I cover?
I'm sorry, Jodi, for being the one to bust your optimism
Not optimism, it's just.
Well, even,
Jacob.
yeah, listen, I'm going to be a little depressing right now, and say that I actually wrote a piece, but it just, sort of, every day that passes by, you just see it happening. Netanyahu is not going to go, willingly. He's not going to step down. He's not going to initiate early elections. Now, the other scenarios are very nuanced. I can sit here for 3 hours and give you all the options.
Let's
And
do the 3-minute version.
yeah, so the 3-minute version is the scenario where they topple this government and swear it. It's basically in order to topple the government, you have to initiate a no confidence vote, but at the same time, the 61 who vote for the no confidence have to present a government. And the only scenario in which that happens is where some opposition parties come together and offer these 5 members or whoever joins in that no confidence vote that a member of the Likud ruling party will become prime minister. And so nobody should think that if Netanyahu is removed from power, suddenly Abbas is going to announce the creation of a Palestinian state and peace with the Saudis will be announced within a week or two. Those are the most hawkish members of the Likud who might bolt this government. They're not going to bolt the government because of a hostage deal. They're not going to accuse Netanyahu of failing to sort of bring security or bring an absolute victory in the war, but it's sort of personal, where these 5 people just, Netanyahu never gets along with anyone, but in particular in the last 2 years, these are the people who want to see him gone. Now, the second scenario is in which Netanyahu understands, and he is a realist by nature, that if he understands that he cannot either hold this 64-member coalition or bring in some of the right-wing members from, if it's Avigdor Lieberman, if it's Gideon Sa'ar, who is now in a party with the National Unity with Benny Gantz, then he will initiate elections, but that won't take place until this phase of the war, moves into sort of something else, which is a total ceasefire, okay? This is not going to happen within the next few months. The only date for an early elections is sort of around June, July. But again, it all remains to be seen whether or not there is currently a sort of a proposal which Hamas rejected today. But if that hostage deal is announced and the Israeli cabinet has to decide whether to accept or reject it, all the cards are on the table. Everything can happen. The right could demand Netanyahu's resignation, or the left could come into a government and save Netanyahu for a year or two. Yair Lapid could be the one saving Netanyahu's career for the very near future.
Thank you, Jacob. Okay, we are almost out of time, so I want to run through some of these questions. Most of our questions are from anonymous attendee. I don't know if that's all the same person or not, but this last one from anonymous attendee, I just want to, I feel like we got to nail this down. So they're asking, are we collectively saying that Israeli Jews are, for the most part, fairly unanimous in their support of their government's current war efforts? And if there is dissent, is it in the minority? So the polls have shown, in the 70% range of people basically supporting the war, almost very consistently, particularly strong support among Israeli Jews. Today, there was a poll, which is mentioned in Susan's story, from the Israel Democracy Institute, that asked people which of the 2 stated war goals they cared more about, freeing the hostages or toppling the Hamas. And there was, among Israeli Jews, it was close to an even split, with slightly preferring freeing the hostages, prioritizing freeing the hostages. Overall, it was 51% freeing the hostages, and Arabs very strongly prefer or prioritize the freeing the hostages. I think asking whether the hostage families are on board with the government's actions, I mean, the hostage families are very desperate to get their hostages freed, but they don't really necessarily see, as some in the American left, Jewish and non-Jewish, see this like big tension between the freeing the hostages and the rest of the war goals. I think people, they believe that they do need to free the hostages, and that, you know, Hamas cannot be allowed to stay in power in Gaza. We have not talked at all about how Israelis view Biden and Blinken's efforts. My sense when I was there is that people basically are very happy with how Biden and Blinken have supported Israel. Does anybody have anything to add on that?
It's
Yeah.
not like top of mind, like Susie said. It's just not like, do you care what Mao thinks about like Blinken's efforts? They don't care about, there were Biden cupcakes like week 1 or 2, but they got bigger things to deal with.
I think you have to separate the emotional support that Biden provided Israel immediately after the attacks and what the administration is right now doing on a different level.
Great point.
Emotionally, people feel, well, Biden was there where Netanyahu was not there, and he was sort of this grandpa who brought us all together and feels for us. But I don't think they're very well informed about the initiatives or the policy proposals.
Yeah,
I just have to say also, we haven't talked about it really tonight, but there is a very serious chance, and it's on the forefront of most Israelis' minds, of the North heating up. And Hezbollah's military capabilities make Hamas look like the toy army that they are. Hezbollah is capable of basically leveling Tel Aviv, and it's a really, really serious threat if they get involved. And so I think we in the American context are really thinking about like the geopolitics of it, and Israelis are very conscious that if that happens, like this is an existential war in their
yeah.
minds.
I recently did an event with Mati Friedman, the Canadian Israeli author and journalist, and he said, he's like, the war may not have started yet. Like we're
Yeah.
4 months into a war, and it might be the pre-war. Okay, I think this might be our last question. From Sharon Alexander. She said,
Wait. I have to interrupt.
Okay.
You have to get to the fourth part of Anonymous's question because it's a good question. Did I get this right? Were you all saying Israelis want America to step up more and offer more support, but they don't care about what Americans think of their actions? Yes, that's exactly right. That's what we're saying.
Okay. On to Sharon Alexander. So she says, I'm interested in the Israeli perspective on Palestinians. One gets the feeling in the US that Israelis are unable to empathize with or humanize the Palestinians in Gaza being presently bombed and homeless, as well as those in the West Bank who are being harassed and murdered. I understand that Israelis are in shock that their safety could be breached so easily on October 7th, but is there any awareness about what could make Palestinians so angry and so motivated to launch such a brutal attack? I think I might
They don't care. Like
I think I'm going to take the prerogative here, because it was the last piece that I wrote from my trip in Israel was really about this exact thing, which is, so it's a month ago, but I think it still holds up. So I think I want to say that I think many Israelis care deeply about Palestinians, Palestinian rights inside Israel, in the West Bank, in Gaza in general. And the trauma of October 7th has made a much broader swath of Israelis sort of look away. It is easier to look away there than it is here. I mean, the news does not necessarily show you what's going on in Gaza day to day. But many, as someone else asked earlier, I didn't get a chance to ask this about standing together and coexistence groups. There have been a lot of good journalism really showing how this war and this debate and the propaganda war around it has blown up a lot of coexistence work, because it's really exposed the ways in which what brought Israeli Jews and Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza together for coexistence work was so different. Their motivations were so different, their needs were so different, and people are having a really hard time absorbing the different things people are saying about each other now, in a way that even the kind of deep racism of the last number of years pales compared to this. Anyway, I was really struck, and some of you I hope have read this because it was in my last column from the trip, but One of my really good friends there, Rabbi Levi Wyman Kelman, who some of you may know, he's the founding rabbi of Kol Neshama, the Reform Synagogue in Jerusalem. And he visited when I did a live Zoom from my trip there. Some of you may have been on there. He spoke for a few minutes. Anyway, on the way back that night, he was walking me back to my hotel, and he said, I'm ashamed at how my heart has shrunk, because he hadn't been focused enough on what Sharon's talking about what's happening to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And he just said he didn't have the capacity. This was in, early December, but I think it goes on till today. The amount of trauma that people are absorbing and the amount of fear from their own security, and the amount of worry about the soldiers who are there, people feel like their capacity has run dry for empathy. This is the scariest thing to me. Empathy is a key tool for us journalists to understand different people's perspectives and experiences, but it's also the only way I can imagine any kind of deal that would resolve the conflict, and that would, involve the only way to resolve this conflict and make a peace deal is for people to really give up things that are important to them on both sides. And that involves a lot of empathy. And I think we are having a real empathy gap that is persisting. And a lot of people have said it's like October, 207 or something, right? It's like, or we're still on October 8th. And I think that's what I saw when I was there. I think all of us are kind of saying that. So I'm sure it will change. I hope it will change sooner rather than later, so that we can make progress somewhere in terms of, I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to end on such a hopeless note. Let's do a quick round. I know people are probably signing. Some people might have to sign off. They may have other things at 8 o'clock, but let's just, Laura, Jacob, Susan, just last words, last thoughts. What's coming up for you as you've seen the questions in the comments?
The most sobering thing for me is thinking about people my age in Israel and Palestine, in the Palestinian territories, Gaza, West Bank. I'm 29. Most Israelis and Palestinians my age, 84% on both sides, see themselves as the exclusive victims of the conflict. That is not a position. I wrote a column about this. That is not a position from which we can have any of the 90s era Oslo conversations about peace and diplomacy. And if we believe in those things, we have to reckon with the reality that my friends in Israel and my friends in Gaza are not in the position of feeling like they're out of empathy. They're in the position of feeling like, why should I need to have empathy for the oppressor? And we gotta deal with that.
Thanks, Laura. Jacob, as the next youngest person.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted sort of to build on what you and Laura said, which is, I think that Israelis are not as well informed as they should be about the situation of the Palestinians in Gaza. Watching TV every day, almost for hours on end, you only hear about the destruction there, but not about what Palestinians themselves are facing. And it's our opportunity, but also our job as journalists, first of all, to ask the hard questions, but also to sort of point out both the plight of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza and in the West Bank, and in the end, they are destined to live side by side, regardless of when this conflict ends. But also for us to understand that if we are going to sort of write about October 7, about the devastation that happened there to Israelis, we can't separate that from that. We can sympathize with the Palestinians, understand that what is happening is sort of devastating, but also that Israel has no choice but to defend itself. And this is the
Yeah, you're reminding me, Jacob, I did an event at Yale, I don't know, last week or the week before, and I spoke about the complexity and that we are always trying to kind of help people navigate through. And at the end, the rabbi who was hosting this event said, it's not complicated, it's simple. He said, what happened on October 7th was simple. It was this and that and this. And I said, You're right. What happened on October 7th was very straightforward and simple and awful. But there's a lot of things that happened before October 7th and after October 7th. And that's where it gets really complicated. And that's where our job is to, pursue the complexity and the context and the questions with empathy and with a 360-degree view. I'm gonna, Susan, what is on your mind quickly?
Yeah, that, Israelis are huge travelers. They're global citizens. You see them everywhere you go around this earth. And their either comfort level or sort of imperviousness to how isolated they are right now is really striking. And that's why in some ways I see our coverage as even more important. I don't think that there's a more important audience really than American Jews to sort of shine that mirror at them and have them look at, like, you are really, really isolated. And I think they are not ready to see that. And my huge question here, maybe my biggest question is, will they reckon with that? And does that matter? And will it be too late?
Thanks, Susan. And thank you all for joining us for this discussion and for your support of the Forward. I just want to say once again, we were able to hire Susan because of your membership and support. We have someone on the ground there. The three of us were able to travel there in the fall because of readers like you who care about independent Jewish journalism and who will support it, will step up and not just read it, not just share it, but invest in it. So we are deeply, deeply grateful. It won't be here unless you and others keep on supporting us and helping us. And we want to hear your feedback. You are welcome. If you have story ideas about Israel, please email Greene with an E at forward.com. And if you have anything that you want to say about the Forward or anything else, you can email me. My last name is Rudoren at forward.com. Please watch your email. Also, you will be getting a video and links and some photographs from Israel in your email to remember, to memorialize this event, and you can share it with your friends or social media, whatever. And watch your email for future events. We're going to be in Florida for a couple events later this month. We've got a virtual event coming up about Yiddish. And there are other events too. And we'll be doing more beyond the bylines where you can, as somebody put in the chat earlier, see the faces and hear the voices behind the bylines that you see every day in the Forward. Rachel ran over it very quickly. Laura Adkins, her last day with the Forward was Friday. Thank you so much for coming back and being with us and for all that you gave the Forward over the last 2.5 years. Laura has moved on to be working at Jewish Women International. So you can watch for her there. But you can find Jacob, Susan, and I at the Forward. Thank you again for being here. And I hope we'll see you soon.